Where's work?
Where's work, please? Oh, the eggs, yeah. That's right.
Come through one of the, did you one of the days?
No.
Broadcasting live from the Shed HQ during lockdown. Welcome back to another episode of RH Automotive. With your host, Mr. Giggs. I must start off with a shout out to what we're grand to do. I was watching his video the other night on his biking history and it really inspired me to make this video. I have this surplus of footage on my hard drive that I just have no use for. And it's actually pretty fun to look back on. So today, lads, we're going to travel back in time to 2011. 15-year-old Giggs was mad for road, and with his theory test passed, he picked up this. A PIAGGIO Vespa Energy MC3. Fuel injected 50cc with a carbon power pipe. The day I turned 16, I went straight into the tax office and picked up my learner's permit. And the very next day I drove to school. This was absolutely class, because now I was able to sleep in the mornings and I didn't need to catch a stupidly early bus. The first taste of independence, isn't it great? I also installed a sound system under the seat, so when I pulled up to the boys, I was able to blast out some decent tunes. I drove the ped for about 3 months before selling it on to a friend and getting him on the road. Meanwhile, I was on the hunt for a Honda NSR. I managed to pick up this 04 NSR 50 for a good price. What's good about this is I rang to swap over my insurance and it was the same price as the ped, which at the time for me was €620 for the year with Liberty. So I rang him up, swapped over the details, and I was learning to ride a geared bike for the first time. It had an NSR 80 engine fitted and a G&L pipe, which pretty much voided my insurance. This video in particular was filmed on my old bridge camera that I ended up strapping to the tank. After driving this bike for a few months, I just knew I was hooked. Eventually I started putting a bit of money into the bike. I stripped it down to the frame and I rattle canned the fairings black and I wrapped the bike in Repsol livery. It's probably the most effort I ever put into a bike. I absolutely loved the thing. It taught me so much. From my first top end rebuild to changing the tyres by hand to save money. Not to mention it was just so easy to work on. NSRs had a kinda cult following. They really were the bike of the time back when I started driving. Everyone I knew started out driving NSRs, and of course not forgetting the amount of friends I've made through them, and still friends to this day, and are still out driving bikes. It really was a bug I caught, and this is the bike I can thank for it. Also, I came across this clip back when I was experimenting with a DIY helmet cam setup, back before the days of GoPros. Don't forget just how far we've come, lads. So anyway, approaching 2012, I was ready to move on up and get more power. Supermoto's always kinda aroused me. I used to be watching Queerly rip around on his DTR doing mad wheelies. So my heart was set. I wasn't really sure how it got so lucky, but I did end up finding one of them bikes. It was a 01 and it looked like it had been through the wars. But nothing a Heikon couldn't sort. Some fresh graphics and a bit of polish. The DT really was a bike that just went everywhere. I mean, like a 17-year-old baiting around on a 2-stroke 125 with dirt bike wheels. What could go wrong? Of course, when you're 17, young, broke and stupid, pretty much everything. So much so that I had to purchase an NSR 80 as a backup bike, but I just ended up flipping it and putting my trust in the DT once more. A few months down the road I picked up a set of DTX wheels and that transformed the bike again. But it wasn't much longer and the bike was pretty much broken down again. So I had to buy another bike, and this is where the GN125 enters. I bought it off a friend, threw on a set of rental bars and drove the whole of it. It even featured in the newspaper when I drove it into a big pothole. The GN was a legendary bike in itself. It never let me down. Although I did have a few scary moments due to the width of the wheels and the cheap tyres. Another time I ended up low sliding in front of a large group of people pulling into a greasy McDonald's car park. So I did learn another few things on the GN125 and I did have lots of crack. But I was slowly approaching 18 and I was ready to get my hands on an A2 permit. So this CBR 250 was parked in my shed for a few months. It was an original 1987 CBR 250, the MC19 Hurricane model. My dad originally purchased this as a non-runner cheap and luckily it was just a dead battery. He was supposed to do up the bike himself originally, but that never happened, and I took ownership and just started doing it myself. I sprayed the bike glass white and I got the chrome RR stickers off the MC22 model, so it was looking sweet. I still had to get an exhaust, so I picked up a Viper can and just welded that one on. I think I spent about all of 3 months on the CBR before I realised 4 cylinders were just not for me. I obviously wanted to get my ass on a DRZ since I love supermoto so much. They're not really a common bike here in Ireland, but luck would soon strike again and the holy grail of DRZs, an E-model, popped up for sale in the local adverts. You see, the E-models came with a flat side carb, bigger cams, plastic fuel tank, lighter subframe, and no indicators or speedo from the factory. It was pretty much an off-road bike with a reg. This 2001 bike also had a 470cc big bore, a hot rod stroker crank and a JE forged piston. It also came with a set of supermoto rims. Pretty much ticked all the boxes for the bike I was looking for. Compared to the CBR, the DRZ was just a way more fun to drive. You didn't have to be going fast to have fun, and I learned that from my earlier bikes. It was even more fun in the city. Every traffic light and junction you're trying to resist temptation to just not flick the clutch. That being said, it did draw some attention from unwanted crowds, but I think it was honestly worth it. It was just probably one of the best bikes I ever had. Suzuki DRZs are well known for their reliability, but I still managed to break it on several occasions. That would turn out to be one of the main factors in how this bike came to an end. I ended up breaking it for parts and selling it to a friend. So you see, I like keeping my sales within a close circle. It's just so much handier than throwing it up in Dundee and dealing with time wasters. It'll also come in handy, as you'll find out later. So there was actually a gap in between here where I didn't have any bikes. I was just after buying my first car and I was getting on the road to learning how to drive. But obviously I couldn't last without my 2 wheels, so when I had enough money saved up, I picked up this. A 2003 KTM EXE 200, 200cc 2-stroke. It had no kickstand, no key. It wasn't a bike you could leave outside the shop unattended. It was a very smooth bike to drive on the road, even smoother than the DRZ thanks to a 6th gear. Surprisingly, even being a KTM and a 2-stroke, it was really reliable. I've no problems at all really to report. I only owned it about a couple of months, but I got good fun on it. I traded it in exchange for some parts and labour that I needed done on my car at the time. After this, I picked up a cheap Honda Hornet 250 which needed an engine, so I drove this on the side while I gathered some money to trade up, then flipped it on. After having a quick blast on an SV, I was gobsmacked at the torque. I just had to get myself a V-twin. A friend of a friend was selling his, so I arranged to view it and take it for a spin. It was a second generation fuel injected SV 650S, K3 but registered in 2004. The SV is what I consider to be my first big bike. It was the one I could finally take on longer spins and journeys without the fear of breaking down. I also swapped out the clip-ons for a set of rental bars so I could sit a bit more upright. The bike already had a power commander, a Scorpion exhaust, and it was mapped, so I was pretty much happy with it. I drove this bike from Cork to Dublin for phase 4 of my apprenticeship, so I got some nice adventuring done in between. My highlight is probably taking it off-road around the locked gate leading up to the mast in Kipmore, the tallest paved road in Ireland, 757 metres high. Of course, the SV650, Japanese V-twin, another engine renowned for its reliability, but I still managed to break it. One Friday evening, making my way home from Dublin, about a mile from my house, the SV just died suddenly. I honestly wasn't expecting what had just happened. The stator was sat inside the casing after it sheared off from the crank. The magneto was also pretty damaged. This killed the ignition of the bike and it just came to a stop, completely dead. Talking to a friend that raced production V-twins, he heard that the 03 model were known for crank failure under hard decel and acceleration, and the crank can just shear due to oil starvation in that spot. Just something to take note with the K3 models. I don't think any other ones were affected. I found a cheap engine to replace the lump and I just swapped it out over a weekend, but the bike had already been tainted for me, so it just had to go. A few months previous, while I had the SV, the same friend I sold this bike to had rebuilt it from the ground up, swapping out the engine, swing arm, subframe, wheels, forks, pretty much everything for the newer DRZ SM equivalent, so not a lot was left of the original bike. Only the frame, FCR carb, plastic tank and the seat remained. As the DRZ was now fitted with a reliable, low mileage lump that would cause little issues over the next few years, the whole experience of owning a DRZ just got even better. I was so happy to be back on this bike. Travelling to faraway places and seeing new things was fun, but the advantage of mounting curbs and going places other motorbikes couldn't just appealed so much to me. Over the next few months I tried to make it my own again by tidying it up and fitting new graphics along with a few other bits and pieces. Out of all the bikes I've owned, I think the DRZ was definitely my favourite, hence buying it back in the first place. The bike came to an early end when the sprocket bearing went kaput and the bike needed its cases split open along with a full engine rebuild. But I knew it was time to move on as it wasn't something I was willing to fix or spend more money on, so I had little choice but to sell it on as parts for the second time. Around the summer of 2018, before I got rid of the DRZ, I came across a DTR on Dundee hidden in an ad full of classic bikes for sale. It was a 1991, 10 years older than my original DT that was in bits in my garage, but the same model that was in production between 1988 and 2003. There was very little remaining of my original bike that had donated parts to others over the last few years, but thankfully I kept the DTX wheels, so I threw them on first. I then proceeded to spend a little bit too much money on it, replacing the plastics, painting a few bits and pieces and getting it looking fresh again, while also keeping everything original and how it looked from factory. Currently at this present time, the DT sits awaiting a top-end rebuild, a job that I started over a year ago and due to serious laziness just hasn't been completed yet. Only a few months after picking up DT number 2, I got the opportunity to buy another NSR 50 that popped up on Facebook Marketplace. Within minutes of the ad being posted, I had contacted the guy and arranged for him to pick me up and bring me to the bike. When I got there, the brakes were seized, but it did run. With no other way of transporting it, I pried back to the brake pads, hopped on, gave it a kick and started to make my long, slow journey home. While en route, I stopped off at a garage and was immediately offered twice the money I had just paid by a recovery truck driver who was looking to buy one for his son. I bit my lips and kindly declined cause I knew I had a gem in my hands. So if we just reverse briefly a bit, while the DRZ was broken and in bits and I sold it on for parts, I was now out looking for my replacement daily driver. Thankfully I had an old Yamaha blaster in the shed that I was looking to get rid of, so I popped that up on Facebook Marketplace and I got offered a swap for a clean 2007 Kawasaki ER6N. The guy just outgrown the bike and was looking for a quad for his son, so it worked out good for both of us. The ER6 was never really a bike I thought I'd see myself on, but it really did pack a punch that I wasn't expecting. Being an inline twin, it was pretty much a cheaper alternative to the MT-07, with power being very close to the SV650. But compared to it, focused this power more high up in the rev range. It was a really fun bike to drive and I'm happy I got to experience it before moving on to bigger bikes, since the ER6 is known for being a good learner's bike. It just wasn't something I was going to get back to. Also, thanks to its reliability, I now felt more comfortable enough to venture up as far as Mallinhead, travelling the entire west of the country up along the Wild Atlantic Way route. Only for this trip I don't think I'd respect the ER6 just as much, but it was a great bike to take on such a long journey. So, last but not least, the VFR 800. Last year I had turned 24, so I applied for my A permit and decided it was time to move up. I was looking for something fully fared but also not really a full-on sports bike. Lots of trawling through Dundee and researching the forums online, and I had decided on something a little bit different. The RC46 was always a bike that caught my eye, with the DNA of a sports tourer and a very reliable V4 motor motor helps me make up my mind. It was also an engine I had never driven before and wanted to experience. They were also very affordable at the time and just in my price range. I've probably had the VFR a good solid 9 months now, and I really rate it high up in my list of favourite bikes that I've owned. It turned out to be a good choice in the end. In terms of future bikes that I'm interested in, it honestly could be anything. I could list out all my dream bikes or set a goal for what's next, but honestly, I'm happy to just take whatever comes my way. Usually the random bikes are the best, so all I can say is I'll keep open-minded and enjoy biking as it unfolds. Have you owned any bikes on my list? If so, what did you think of them, and how was your experience when you owned it? Hopefully it was a bit better than mine. Also, if you have any questions about any of the bikes that I mentioned here, pop them down in the comments below and I'll try my best to answer them. So guys, that pretty much wraps it up from me. Thanks very much for tuning in. If you liked it, hit subscribe and hit that like button, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.
Spit over rainbow shit. I'm a vandal, got that silver duct tape on my tray handle. The women in my life bring confusion and shit. So like Nino and Untitled, I'll cancel that bitch. Look at me. This is the life I chose. Niggas around me so cold. Man, my heart done froze. I built an empire on a load of
Where's work?